Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Sabrina Kofer, and on behalf of Choice and ACRL, I'd like to welcome you to today's program, Torture, State Violence, and Political Prisoners, Exploring the Global Human Rights Movement through the Amnesty International Archives, which is sponsored by AM. This session is one in a series of sponsored webinars from Choice and ACRL that addresses new ideas and developments of interest to the academic library community. So I'll just put some links in the chat for where you can register for upcoming Choice ACRL webinars or watch previous webinar recordings. So before we get started, I'd like to point out just a few features of the webinar software. All of the attendees who join the presentation are automatically muted and your cameras are off, so don't worry about generating any noise or feedback. We've got that taken care of for you. In the main area of the screen, you can follow along with the presentation materials. To adjust the size of the slides or video, you can use the divider in the middle of the screen to slide the sizes to your liking. We are using the Q&A feature today. Please use it to ask questions of our speakers. We'll answer as many questions as we have time for at the end of the presentation, so please do type your questions into the Q&A module as they occur to you. Also, there is closed captioning available for today's session. To toggle the automated captions on or off, please use the CC button on the bottom right corner of your screen. Last, please note that we are recording today's program and everyone who registered should receive a follow-up email with a link to the archive version. And with that, we're ready to get started, so I will hand it over to Eleanor.
Thanks, Sabrina. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Eleanor Cambridge. I'm an assistant editor at AM, and I was the supporting editor for Amnesty International Archives, a global movement for human rights. It's really exciting to be introducing you to this today. It's been fantastic to see the resource go live after all the hard work of the team to bring the collection together. So today's speakers are myself, as well as Fiona Bolt, who is Information Manager at Amnesty International. And we also have Rebecca Yemo on behalf of Professor Nada Ali, both of whom are part of the University of Massachusetts, Boston. And without further ado, I will introduce you to the resource. So the resource explores the creation and expansion of NGO and human rights organisation Amnesty International through the digitised archives of Amnesty's International Secretariat, which have been sourced from the International Institute of Social History in Amsterdam. The documents in the resource begin with the founding in 1961 and follow Amnesty's development for the following 30 years. It offers insight into the internal development of Amnesty as they grew and expanded their mandate, as well as contextualizing Amnesty International in the global human rights movement and how they have influenced the defense of human rights. Initially begun with the specific intention of advocating for prisoners of conscience, Amnesty has expanded into campaigning for the abolition of torture and the death penalty, as well as advocating for women's, Indigenous peoples, and refugee rights. The campaigns, internal developments, and press perceptions of Amnesty are all explored in detail through the documents that are featured in this resource. Over the next 5 or so minutes, I will introduce you to the different kinds of content you will have access to, as well as the themes and original content AM have produced. So all documents within the resource have been indexed and tagged to maximize searchability for users. There are 15 document types, including the oral history audio files, which feature interviews with Amnesty's founders, including Peter Benenson, urgent actions detailing requests for action to intercede in humanitarian crises around the world, and protest atrocities, and a breadth of documents that show the changes from an organisation dedicated solely to prisoners of conscience to an internationally recognised NGO campaigning for all forms of human rights. Optical character recognition, or OCR, has been applied to all documents, and a searching guide with advice on how best to harness keyword searches and the metadata contained within the resource is also available. A video with Dr. Sarah Dunstan discusses the evolution of language and surrounding minority rights and how that evolution can be clearly seen within the documents. A different path to accessing the material within Amnesty International Archives is through the collections and the guide to collections. The 8 collections correlate to how the material is stored at the International Institute of Social History, with the guide breaking down the types of documents and the content users can expect to find within each collection. For example, the papers of Eric Baker, a founding member of Amnesty and the man who coined the term prisoner of conscience, is subdivided into four categories: campaign for the abolition of torture, correspondence, other documents, and British section, each containing different aspects of Baker's work for Amnesty. A particular challenge of the Amnesty material was the question of data protection. This is particularly important as this material will now be distributed more widely in a digital medium and have global reach, including the countries where individuals may have suffered those human rights abuses. In order to protect these individuals, redaction has been utilised to ensure compliance with UK GDPR, where content references private individuals and contains special category data, which could identify the data subjects and therefore cause harm. Redactions have been applied manually after digitization by AM, and the same approach was taken to the written documents as well as the photographs within the resource. Our copyright and data protection page contains a note on the redaction outlining the applied policy. Amnesty International Archives also features an interactive map with integrated chronology. The map shows where new Amnesty sections were opening and where urgent actions have been issued requesting action from Amnesty's members. The chronology events are pinned to the map to give a visual demonstration of how Amnesty intersected with the global human rights movement across the 30-year period contained within the resource. The chronology was developed in collaboration with members of the editorial board, marking both the terrible crimes against humanity and the progress in enshrining human rights into law during the 20th century. Events and human rights abuses mentioned within the resource and the chronology include the Sudan Civil War, the Trouble in Ireland, the question of Rudolf Hess, Pinochet's Chile and the disappeared, segregation ending in the USA, the Berlin Wall, and apartheid ending in South Africa. There is also a wealth of supporting material designed to help with using the resource to teach students and encourage exploration of the material by both students and academics. Testimonies and personal accounts pulls out the individual stories of those who witnessed or suffered first-hand experience of the abuses Amnesty was working to stop. These provide a crucial outside perspective from the point of view of those involved in the human rights abuses instead of from within the organisation of Amnesty, and include the voices not only of those suffering human rights abuses, but also those accused of perpetrating them. Professor Tom Buchanan has also created a brief history of Amnesty International, which serves as a launching point for students who are unfamiliar with the origins of Amnesty and those involved in its founding, which is an excellent time to hand over to Fiona Bolt, who is the Information Manager of Amnesty International.
Thank you very much, Eleanor, for that excellent summary of the collection. I hope I'm not going to go over the same ground now, but Eleanor's pretty much better than I imagine that I will in the next 20 minutes. My name is Fiona Bolt, and I am the Information Manager at the International Secretariat of Amnesty International based in London. My team is responsible for all things information at Amnesty, but we also are responsible for the archive. Excuse me. Although I'm not actually the archivist, we do have a dedicated archivist within the team. So today I'm just going to tell you a little bit more about the history of Amnesty and a little bit about the history of Amnesty's archive and how it came to be. And then I'm going to talk about the experience of working with AM to produce a collection like this, which was a really new project for me and a really, really steep learning curve. Okay. So in November 1960, UK lawyer Peter Benenson read an article in a newspaper about two Portuguese students in Lisbon who were arrested and sentenced to 7 years imprisonment for raising a toast to freedom in public. He was so incensed by the injustice of this act that he determined to start a campaign to draw public attention to the plight of political and religious prisoners around the world. And he kicked it off by writing an article that was published in the Observer newspaper in the UK in May 1961. And here on the screen, you can see some of the versions of that article that were published in newspapers around the world. So it became a global campaign really quickly. So this year is the 75th anniversary of the UDHR, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In fact, it was the UDHR's birthday 2 days ago on the 10th of December. It's been a really busy time for the archives, so we've been getting out a lot of material that shows how Amnesty has reflected the articles of the UDHR in its work over the years. Much of the early work of Amnesty in the 1960s focused on prisoners of conscience, so i.e. those who had been imprisoned or persecuted for the peaceful expression of their beliefs, as enshrined in Articles 18 and 19 of the UDHR. And some of the most fascinating archive material in the collection is some of the discussions that was had around, who was defined as a prisoner of conscience and who wasn't. Obviously, the most famous example was Nelson Mandela, who was originally accorded the status of prisoners of conscience, and then later it was decided to withdraw that status because of the position the ANC took around using guerrilla tactics and sabotage in their activities in South Africa. That was still a very controversial decision that still gets discussed even at Amnesty today. Over time, Amnesty's mandate expanded to cover torture, the death penalty, and judicial processes for political prisoners. And gradually, there was a shift away from the exclusive focus on prisoners and towards people outside of prison. So that meant that we were talking about abuses experienced, such as extrajudicial executions, mass killings, and disappearances. And this also brought new groups into Amnesty's orbit, so for both perpetrators in the form of non-governmental entities such as armed groups, and victims such as human rights and Indigenous peoples. And today, Amnesty pretty much campaigns on the full spectrum of human rights, and highlights over the years has obviously included a seminal conference against torture in 1973 that contributed very much to the UN Convention Against Torture. Amnesty was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize in 1977. And then later highlights was, for example, Amnesty's role in the arrest of General Augusto Pinochet in the UK in 1998. That actually happened in the first week that I joined Amnesty. I've been here for 25 years, and that was my joining week. It was an amazing time to be part of a human rights organization. So, okay, I'm going to leave the history of Amnesty there for a moment, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about the history of the archive. So, Amnesty's currency is information, collecting information, analysing information, producing reports, pushing those reports out so people can campaign against human rights abuses. That's our lifeblood. So it was recognised very early on in the history of Amnesty that we needed a way to collect that information. The lifespan of information around human rights abuses is really long. So even in the last few years, I have taken records which are more than 50 years old out of the archives to support ongoing truth and justice projects in various countries, such as Sri Lanka, the Philippines, and Botswana, to name but a few. So Amnesty really recognised the importance of preserving records, as I say, for very early on in its history. And I've realised I've just missed a slide, which was the Nelson Mandela discussion from our governance collection. Apologies for that, but I'll go straight to the next one, which is the decision to establish the archive in 1978. So we had an archive before we even had a fundraising department, campaigns department, or even a human resources department. So that was the sort of importance of saving information for the future, recognised in the Amnesty International movement really early on. If you ask my colleagues at the Secretariat at the moment if they're aware that Amnesty's archive is available to the public, they would probably be surprised. Amnesty staff see the archive as very much an internal resource. It's very much part of ongoing day-to-day human rights work that is carried out now. We have a very small archives team. We've just got 1.4 archivists, and they spend the majority of their time supporting Amnesty staff. In 1997, we decided to outsource the access to the public parts of the archive to the International Institute for Social History in Amsterdam, and they've done an amazing job supporting academics and researchers from around the world. That doesn't mean to say that my team doesn't support external researchers. We do, but because of limited capacity, we have to prioritize projects that are likely to have the largest impact on improving the human rights situation. So the archive is roughly divided into three areas: our outputs, our governance, and the raw material that was collected in order to produce all of those outputs. I'm going to be talking in a minute about the collections which were selected for the AM collection, but I think it's really important to note here that actually that's just the tip of the iceberg when it comes to the Amnesty Archive. We have hundreds of thousands of case files, of copies of correspondence with governments and other bodies, of thousands and thousands of field mission notes that have taken place over the years in all corners of the globe. So we have very strict closure periods around all that material, but doesn't mean to say that we're not looking for opportunities to leverage the learnings that is contained within that vast store of information to help inform, the general discourse around human rights. So how did we get to the point of publishing the Adam Matthews collection? Well, in 2018, somebody from Adam Matthews reached out to us and said, would we be interested in forming a partnership on this? I'd already had previous experience of working with a publisher in that kind of way. For many years, we published something with a publisher called Brill, called the Amnesty Country Dossiers, which some of you on the call may be familiar with. It was a micro format of Amnesty outputs, and that was published from, I think, the early 1980s up until 2014. So I leapt at the chance to partner with Adam Matthews to bring this collection online. I'm not going to pretend it wasn't a hard sell in other parts of Amnesty. Obviously, putting information behind a paywall does not come naturally to an organisation that wants to make our information as accessible as possible to help promote human rights. But the arguments were really strong. I mean, firstly, the archive had started a digitization project a few years previously, but because of lack of resources and lack of capacity, we were moving forward extremely slowly, and it was obvious that it was going to take many years to get any kind of momentum on that digitization. So here's Adam Matthews now promising to sort of like digitize and give us really high quality images of our archives. And yeah, how could we possibly say no to a deal like that? The other winning point in the business case for going ahead with this was obviously Amnesty is making a percentage of the royalties every year, along with the International Institute for Social History. And that's all money that we can invest in developing the archive, doing further digitization to provide better access to both internal and external audiences. And finally, I suppose obviously the last point about partnering with Adam Matthews was this is an amazing opportunity for us to promote Amnesty's work and achieve some lasting human rights change by applying these learnings of the last 60 years. There are significant amounts of legacy files on Amnesty's own website, but that website is not really designed for academia. So the structure and search aids and supplementary tools that Adam Matthews have added to the site, really will help people search and retrieve information in a much better way than they could do looking for legacy files on Amnesty's own systems. So anyway, having agreed to go forward with this project, we set off with the intention of maybe delivering something online in 18 months. I look back at my original project plan today, and in the risk section, I saw that I had noted things like, the usual insufficient buy-in and privacy concerns, the archivist getting run over by a London bus, whatever. What I haven't put in there were the two words global pandemic. Obviously, COVID had a massive impact on how quickly we could deliver this project. Not only was the Institute in Amsterdam, where the materials were held, closed for a significant period, but even when it reopened, the Adam Matthews staff in the UK couldn't get over there to help with the review process. In the meantime, my archivist had moved on to a new role. I think I'm on my third archivist since this project began now. Adam Matthew, I think, are also on their third project manager for the project. So it's not been an easy ride, but progress did seem very slow at times, but we're finally there, and yeah, I'm really happy to be here today. In terms of the process we went through with Adam Matthew, the first task was to decide what collections to put online. I'm not going to go through those because obviously Eleanor's already done an excellent job with that. But there's only a certain proportion of our archives that was accessible under our policies anyway, so that was a fairly easy decision. Generally, the Adam Matthew collection consists of two main areas, outputs and governance. I'm really proud of the fact that Amnesty has always been able to track its outputs from the biggest report to the smallest press release. We've been very systematic about keeping all of that material over the years. I think it's very interesting to look at the outputs as a collection because that tells a story in itself. Which countries and subjects at which point in time did Amnesty focus on, and what were the factors influencing that? Was it access to the country? Was it expert human rights knowledge in that area, the development of international human rights standards, global discourse? Or, I mean, don't forget, Amnesty is a membership organisation. We currently have 10 million members, and the views of our members have very much shaped what we've worked on over the years. And I think you will see that in the way that the output collection is organised. So if traditionally the focus of the public-facing part of Amnesty's archives has been around the outputs, then the Adam Matthew collection actually brings us a really good opportunity to take a look at some of the processes and discussions that sat behind the publications of those reports and went on to shape the Amnesty movement as we know it today. Amnesty's governance papers are generally closed for 30 years. And so this is the first time we've been able to manage those papers that are more than 30 years old, accessible to a really wide audience. Governance, not a word that stirs the heart in a lot of conversations. I know my heart always sinks if my manager drops it into a conversation with me, but the governance papers of Amnesty really do give you an insight onto the kind of conversations that were happening in the organisation at the time. So, for example, on the screen now, you can see this is a paper talking about Andrei Sakharov's efforts in the Soviet Union in the 1970s to establish an amnesty presence in a country that was very closed and obviously very hostile to Western human rights organizations. And that kind of insight is only really available by looking through those governance papers. Taking us back to the process with Adam Matthews to get to publication. Honestly, after the selection of the collections, I really took a bit more of a backseat. AMD and the wonderful staff at the IISH really did most of the hard work from there on. I was mostly providing metadata to help enrich the search and retrieval experience. We have a lot of metadata in the archives, and it was really good to see it put to good use. All those years of data entry didn't go for nothing. I was also providing information on copyright and consent for the oral history interviews for the poster collection. I love the poster collection, by the way. Our archive is very text heavy. We have a separate audiovisual archive that's managed by a completely separate team, and I don't have a lot of interaction with. But the posters belong to our part of the archive, and they really are a beautiful, creative insight into human rights campaigning over the years. We've been privileged to work with a lot of, or being given a lot of art by very, very well-known artists. So, for example, the Picasso estate, and we've got posters designed by Juan Miró. Unfortunately, I don't think you'll find those online in the collection because copyright restrictions has probably prevented that. But actually, I think some of the most stunning examples are the sort of homegrown varieties of posters that Amnesty's activists and campaigners over the years have used to get the message across. I should point out at this juncture that this is the archive of the Secretariat of Amnesty International. We also have things called entities called Amnesty sections around the world who do all of the local membership recruitment and campaigning. They are responsible for creating their own archives. Unfortunately, not many of them have the capacity or resources to do that, although some of the bigger ones do have really good archives themselves. So if anyone's on the call from Columbia University, Columbia is the depositing institution for the archive of Amnesty USA, and you probably know far more about that collection than I do. But this collection online that we're talking about today is really the collection of the Secretariat. Okay, I am just about to wrap up. I'm sure you'll be glad to know, but I just want to highlight a couple of challenges. Eleanor already mentioned them that I thought, yeah, for me were really interesting in working on this kind of project. The first was definitely privacy. Our access policy was written in a much gentler data protection landscape, and at a time when access was not widely available to many of our collections. So I did have a few sort of nervous moments about opening up, especially some of those governance papers to the public through the collection. Fortunately, the legal team at Adam Matthews were brilliant. They were really thorough in how they provided redaction and review, and you can find out a lot more about that by reading their section on the website. But yeah, I'm really pleased with how that came out. And then the second challenge was I still had a few nervous moments about how a commercial project would be seen by the Amnesty movement and by my Amnesty colleagues. But I think the end result that we've ended up with here is just so brilliant. I think everybody's clear that there was no way that we would have had the resources or the expertise to develop anything like this in-house. So, it was only ever going to be possible with a commercial partner. I am really pleased with the collection. It launched on the 17th of October. I enjoy looking through it every day. I really hope you get the chance to look through it too. And I think I'm going to leave it there. Thank you.
Perfect. Thank you, Fiona. I believe next is Rebecca, if we can move on to the next slide. There we go. And Rebecca is going to speak on
behalf of Professor Nada Ali, who was part of the editorial board for Amnesty International Archives. Thank you, Rebecca.
Rebecca, I'm sorry, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I want to start my remarks by thanking Adam Matthews and Choice for organizing this webinar. I would also like to thank colleagues in Adam Matthews for inviting me to be part of the editorial board of the project Amnesty International, a global movement for human rights. I have been looking forward to this webinar. My student, advisee, and friend, Rebecca Yemo, doctoral candidate of the Department of Global Governance, Human Security at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and a scholar of human rights institutions and processes, will be reading my remarks. It has been an honor to be part of this initiative for many reasons. Chief among these reasons is that Amnesty International is a movement that I hold in high regard. I'm originally from Sudan, a country that has witnessed political turmoil, dictatorship, and conflicts that started before the country achieved political independence in 1956. These conflicts, as many of you know, extend to this moment. Sudan's most recent war erupted in mid-April of this year and still ongoing. The country has also witnessed a vicious cycle of military dictatorships, followed by short transitional or distorted democratic eras. Women and men in the country have a long history of resistance to military dictatorships. Political activists and human rights and women's rights defenders have paid huge prices consequently. Many face imprisonment and torture, including and especially during the period that the digital archives cover. Now, what this means to me at a personal level and to many scholars, activists, and citizens from Sudan and from other countries with similar circumstances is a deep appreciation of the various forms of global solidarity, such as Amnesty International's Urgent Action Letter writing campaigns to support activists and prisoners of conscience facing disappearance, execution, torture, and abuse. And so the name Amnesty International was familiar to me and to many others during our formative years and later when I started working closely with groups like the Sudan Victims of Torture Group in Egypt, which is now renamed as the Sudanese Organization Against Torture. The first time I visited the premises of the International Secretariat of Amnesty International was in the early 2000s, accompanied by a student activist also from Sudan. I had a meeting with Elizabeth Hodgkin, whom I believe you should approach as you build the oral history section. The reason was that a friend and a fellow activist was arrested upon arrival at Khartoum's International Airport. She was detained for 2 months without trial. She had arrived from Asmara, the capital of neighboring Eritrea. She and I had spent 2 weeks talking with diverse actors about the importance of committing to women's human rights and gender equality in Sudan. My friend visited London shortly after her release to attend a course in her field, and we both visited the International Secretariat of Amnesty International, where she met with a staff member who drafted the urgent action letter. My friend and I felt a deep appreciation for the support and solidarity. She said that the letters from around the world had alarmed the authorities and her prison guards. I know former prisoners of conscience who have joined Amnesty International's sections after their release and after they left the country. They continue to campaign to this day on behalf of other prisoners of conscience and on behalf of communities facing atrocities. I want to congratulate Amnesty International, Adam Matthews, and everyone who has been involved in this project on developing an outstanding and an accessible resource. As an educator who teaches about human rights and gender equality, among other themes and issues, I believe that scholars and educators in higher education and beyond could use the testimonials, urgent action documents, and poster campaigns, collections in our teaching about political history, movement building, human rights, and the global politics of solidarity, especially at a time when social media and internet activism were not available, and where communication and citizen journalism was quite restricted for many. I think these and other tools and content in the collection would work well in courses that introduce students to theories and practices of human rights, in political science courses about social movements, in media studies courses, and courses that engage with the themes of gender, intersectionality, and decoloniality, and in courses that focus on specific regions. Students can use one urgent action release or letter as an entry point to learn about the political history of a certain country or to learn about a political or human rights cause. Students can then work individually or in groups to carry out secondary research about the forms and causes of abuse. The interactive map can also be very helpful in this regard. At the University of Massachusetts, Boston, I have been teaching a core course in the Human Rights minor, housed in the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies department. I have taught or co-taught in this course every fall semester since 2016, with the exception of this year. At the beginning of the semester, I usually introduce students to the Bill of Rights and to various international human rights conventions, declarations, and agreements. Next time I teach this course, I plan to include an experiential learning component where students may use urgent action releases and letters to enhance their understanding of the tenets of international human rights agreements and regional instruments, including the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, for example. Again, I also plan to introduce students in my women's and media class to the rich poster collection to enhance their learning and their critical analytical skills. In fact, the whole digital collection can form part of the basis of a course or a micro course with a strong qualitative methods or experiential learning component. I want to conclude my remarks by making two crucial observations. First, while I'm fond of Amnesty International as a movement for human rights, I do not want to romanticize the organization or its work. AI has witnessed various challenges and shortcomings in recent years. These things happen, and what is important is how an organization or a movement may respond to and address shortcomings in ethical ways that also pay attention to the operation of power and the ways it shapes experiences within and in relationship to organizations and movements. With its origins in movement organizing, I believe AI is equipped to do so. My second point is about the politics of constructing and digitizing archives. Broadly speaking, Archiving and what to include in or leave out of an archive is often an epistemic and political process of decision-making. What an archive tells us and what it is silent about is often telling about broader power relations and hierarchies in a society or globally. At times, looking elsewhere is important. The collection tells us, for example, that initially there was limited attention to issues around women's human rights and gender equality. But meeting minutes show us how women activists within the organization pointed out this shortcoming and how they made concrete asks of the organization that shaped the organization's future direction. The collection also includes a rich report about efforts to render the rights of diverse women as human rights prior to the 1993 Vienna Conference on Human Rights, which resulted in better commitment to and recognition of women's rights as human rights at global policy levels. A related point is, there are many important, rich collections, especially in global South settings, that warrant urgent preservation and digitization, but resources are often limited. For example, the conditions of some of the material in the Bessie Head papers, one of the most important collections of archival literary material on the continent, has deteriorated significantly in recent years. Bessie Head is one of Africa's most important 20th century writers. She was born in South Africa, then moved to exile in Botswana. A group of African feminist scholars, curators, and museum staff have recently launched a fundraising campaign to support the preservation of Bessie Head's archive. So, if you're looking for a new digitization project, here is one. With all this in mind, I believe this collection is going to be an invaluable resource for educators, scholars, and many others. Educators will need to use trigger warnings in their courses, given the difficult and at times disturbing content of the collection. Congratulations again to Amnesty International, Adam Matthews, and all who have been involved in this effort. I hope libraries and universities around the US and globally would acquire this collection so students, faculty members, scholars, and researchers can access it and learn from it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca. And
thank you, Nada, as well, even though she can't be with us today, for preparing those remarks. So we do have a few questions in the Q&A, but please feel free to add to them as we're talking, and we will try to get to as many as possible in the time remaining. So directed to me, could I talk about the development of AM supporting materials, the video, interviews, thematic guides, and contextualizing essays for Amnesty International Archives? So the supporting materials are created in collaboration with academics from around the world, including the editorial board. So each of the editorial board has contributed in some way. For instance, Rick Halperin, who was on the board of Amnesty USA, has created a video interview about his experience being a part of Amnesty International USA and how he has witnessed the development of that section. He also includes two of his students talking about how being a part of one of the few human rights programs that are specifically dedicated to human rights in the US has influenced them and their successful campaigns that they've completed in the duration of their studentship. The thematic guide is to help students and academics and users of the website in general to understand the themes that we have applied to the material. Our themes are deliberately very light touch. It is supposed to be an introduction rather than an exploration of the entire material contained within one document. Frequently, you will find there is overlap in the themes that you find in each document. So, for instance, some of the themes that we have torture and death penalty, but we also have mistreatment and disappearances. Amnesty has a very strict understanding of what can be classed as death and what can be classed as torture and mistreatment. So there is a differentiation within Amnesty, and we were very careful not to mislabel them or to use both. They would prefer to label someone disappeared until they have confirmation of death, for instance, and that was very important. So Fiona, one for you. You mentioned how the materials of the archive are available to the public. Who are the main external users of the archives? For instance, academics, perhaps.
Okay, so the archivist of the International Institute for Social History probably has a better idea of that than I do. As I say, most of the public inquiries go to Amsterdam, but of the ones that come to me, certainly I would say the academia is probably at the top of the list. People who are doing PhDs or research partnerships. We also do get quite a lot of inquiries from people who Amnesty may have worked on their cases in the past, even as far back as the 1960s, or maybe we worked on their family's case, and they're looking to fill in gaps in their family history, and they want to know what we might have in the archive that could do that. Occasionally, they are wanting to use that in truth and reconciliation processes to obtain justice, but those are the inquiries that I really love working on, when you actually get to see the impact on the individuals, even half a century later.
Thank you. So a question for about redaction specifically. Can you discuss the process for verifying deaths, as we have indicated that the names of living people were redacted during digitization, and how that occurred? So for our part, it was data protection under UK GDPR law, and then also to ensure that living individuals were protected. That includes family members who may be identified from anyone who is mentioned within the resource. So it was a lot of research. It was double checking as much as possible, and we have redacted names where we are uncertain and we feel that it would be a violation of their privacy if we didn't redact. It's always a case of protecting the individual, and so we have also redacted any biological data or anything like that within the resource. But actually, a lot of guidance came from Amnesty as well, and how they would like that to be. We wanted to ensure we redacted as little as possible while also protecting people. So one for Fiona. Do you have any insight into the selection of which Amnesty collections were included as part of this this project?
Yes, so we do already have an archives access policy, and there were specific collections that were clear from that policy were okay to be made accessible to the public. So we use that policy pretty much to identify the collections. We also knew that there were certain collections like the urgent actions where they were so stuffed full of data that they would be most useful to particularly an academic audience. So there are still a couple of small collections that are still accessible under our access policy that we didn't include in the Adam Matthews collection. But that was more due to sort of like lack of time or lack of structure in the collections. But generally what you've got in this collection is mostly what's available under our access policy anyway.
I think I was particularly interested in the Urgent Actions collection. I think it's one of the most complete collections that we've digitized as part of this. And that's really exciting to be able to go through those and to see them in their entirety as well.
Yeah, I mean, the importance of the Urgent Action collection is it's a consistent format that was used from 1973 and is still used today. So the way the data is organized and the fact that the urgent actions generally focus on an individual or small groups of individuals, and the metadata is pretty consistent over all of that time, means you've got sort of 50 years worth of really good data there. Although obviously the Adam Matthew collection stops at 1990. After that, you have to go to other sources for the urgent actions.
And then how do you feel that the AM Amnesty partnership helped in the digitization process of the materials, and what are the other user benefits of this partnership?
So the digitization, the advantage of the AMD digitization process was that we were going to get really good quality scans back from that process, because AM were working with a scanning partner who was very experienced in scanning archive collections, whereas here in the UK, because of limited budget, I mean, we quite often have to choose slightly more slightly cheaper companies who may not specialize in the archives world, so don't have quite the same result in terms of what we get back. We do have our own digital preservation system, so all of those scans from AMD now have gone into that system, and it means that we can manage and preserve the format for years to come. We can hold it stable, we can make sure it's not getting corrupted, we can refresh the format when we need to. So hopefully 50 years from now, those scans will still be available to people using the archive. Even if Amnesty's long gone, the archive will still be there.
Yeah, I think for our part, I mean, personally, your knowledge was, or like emailing you and being able to ask those questions was always the fastest way to get an answer. you always knew who to ask. But the metadata as well was fantastic, because you know, being able to see the thought process, but also being able to use the Amnesty's indexing codes, which are part of the collection, have been digitized as part of the collection. I think it makes the transition between the physical archive and the digital archive a much smoother process for academics who are used to going to the physical archive. But also there are certainly like hidden things that you can uncover with the searchability of a website that you maybe can't in the physical, where the metadata is pulled out and you can find things that maybe you wouldn't think were connected. And then Fiona, the types of materials in the archives, have they changed over the years? You mentioned that there are video and audio files now available.
Yes, so definitely. One of the current challenges that the archive is facing is, of course, a lot of the evidence of human rights abuses now isn't just a text-based document or even a video. It's massive data sets, data taken from satellite imagery or data taken from other organizations that we're partnering with. So the challenge of archiving those kinds of formats is definitely something that we're paying a lot of attention to at the moment. But obviously video has become a massive form for us. So much of our evidence these days is collected in video format, and storing video is a very expensive and time-consuming business. So that's definitely something that, I say, we spend a lot of time looking at right now.
Yes, and then a question to me was, how did AM put together the advisory board for the collection? So advisory boards for our collections are always developed alongside the project. So we're always considering who we would like to be advising us on the material as we are trying to approach Amnesty in this instance to get access to the material and begin the process of digitization and putting the resource together. In this case, we were approaching academics with a long history with human rights and who would understand the uses of this material within the academic sphere, and would also understand the importance of data protection and contextualizing Amnesty International in the wider human rights push forward during the 20th century that we were witnessing within this resource. So all of our editorial board, so I mentioned Rick Halperin earlier, who is Director of the Human Rights Education Programme at Southern Methodist University. We also have Bonnie Ibahawa, who is a Professor of Global Human Rights and the Founding Director of the Centre for Human Rights and Restorative Justice at McMaster University. Obviously, Nada Ali was also part of the board, and she focuses on women's rights. So we're always trying to ensure that there is a diverse group of academics who are experts in their field, who are able to advise us on the best way of putting this material together and making it accessible to audiences. I'm going to put out one last call for any last questions in the Q&A, because we are approaching time and I want to make sure that there is no one missing out. If anyone has questions for Nada, who Rebecca was speaking on behalf of. If you would like to email them to me directly or contact the team at AM, and they will be able to put you in touch with Nada and make sure she can answer your questions. Unfortunately, she couldn't be here today. I think that is everything. So, one last question. Rebecca, we have a question about your work and how that intersects with Amnesty International Archives and how this might be able to assist you in your research.
I almost forgot to unmute myself again. So I'm finishing up my PhD in global governance and human security, as I said earlier. And what I mainly look at is I'm looking at the effectiveness of the Universal Periodic Review Mechanism, the UN Universal Periodic Review Mechanism. It's a human rights monitoring mechanism. And I look at the extent to which the recommendations from that process, specifically the one that deals with gender-based violence and women's right to education, have been implemented in sub-Saharan Africa. So my work is mainly sort of digging through reports, digging through information to sort of understand and trace how recommendations have been implemented to improve women's rights. And that is how I know of Nada, because she is on my research committee because of her women's rights focus. So yes, because I look at human rights, of course, it's right up there with the work Amnesty International does. At this point, I haven't really thought deeply on how I would engage the archives in my research because it's quite far advanced. However, going forward, because I have been looking at women's rights issues, I think it would be an interesting source to sort of dig into past records to understand the history and genesis of some of these situations, especially in sub-Saharan Africa. And I think especially when it comes to gender-based violence, which is quite rampant and is something that's very dear to my heart in terms of research. So I think that going forward, I see opportunities of where I use the archive to facilitate further research in that regard. So yeah, I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I will hand back over to Sabrina for final remarks.
Great. Yeah, thanks everyone. I'll just say we have a few minutes, so if anyone has any last questions, feel free to put them in. But in the meantime, I'll just say thanks so much to Eleanor, Fiona, and Rebecca for taking the time to speak with us today. And thank you to our attendees for your questions and comments. I'd like to remind our viewers that we did record today's program, so be on the lookout for a follow-up email from Choice and ACRL with a link to the recording. Also, if you have a few minutes after the presentation to fill out a brief survey, we would really appreciate it. So I think that's it. So thanks again to all of you out there for joining us. We hope you learned something new from the session and hope to see you again in the near future on another webinar.
Thanks very much, Sabrina.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you.